So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay, and this is going to be another in the series that it is Lord Belagos who sent me the last one. He has changed his name on the Discords and in the actual game itself, but it is the same person. And this is going to be another in those series where, in much the same way as the Reforged battles we did under Spirit of Thunder's name, these are going to be real-life historical battles viewed through the lens of Silmarillion. And today, it's going to be Thermopylae, or Thermopylae, whichever way it's actually pronounced. I always make a real habit of butchering stuff like Greek, but no matter. There is also another one he has sent me, and it's actually been a little while since I've recorded. Probably the longest gap in recording that I've done, albeit you won't actually notice this because the schedule will proceed unimpeded, but because of university all of a sudden kicking into high gear for me, I've only been streaming, so for the past couple of weeks I actually haven't been recording, and this has led to a sudden build-up of replays, including on Silmarillion, which means I do need to do all the Silmarillion recordings first. So when this one comes out, 3 of the next 4 will probably be Silmarillion replays for that reason, because I have actually fallen behind as it stands on the active Silmarillion build, so if I'm going to use these, I need to do them now. So there's another one from Belagos as well that he has made, which is another historical reenactment battle, much like this one, and there's also one from Eclipse as well, which is another scenario, so expect to see those in the coming days. There will be a Reforged replay hidden amongst them as well, or nestled amongst them I should say. But for here, Thermopylae. We won't be referring to it as that, I will say, because I do believe that someone else is already going to be doing this as a series focusing more on the real-life historical battles, and Thermopylae as well is one of those battles that everyone knows because of its presence in modern pop culture anyway. But it's going to be much the same layout as last time, because, of course, it's part of the same war that Plantea took place in, which means the Persians are going to be represented once again by the Easterlings. The Easterlings, for me, I find them pretty awkward to play as. They definitely have their strengths, but they're not my favourite to play as in terms of their strengths and weaknesses, because I do like a sure place to stand, a nice core to my army, and all round having a nice solid force. And while the Easterlings do have that in the Lothlin units, you can't just rely on them. You do need to rely on some of the other sort of ancillary units that the Easterlings can bring. And for me, in my playstyle, I find them to leave a little bit to be desired, but there's no doubting they can be effective in the right hands. And we have the Easterling Marauders, who are very, very basic under the command of Eclipse 2500 of the Dark Cloud. Relatively low damage for hand-thrown projectiles, but of course they still pack a bit of a punch. And in this situation, because Thermopylae, of course, is holding a narrow pass in a choke point and sort of holding the enemy at bay with brute strength, stuff like this will be very useful for trying to break up the front lines that they run up against the Easterlings. So it will be quite interesting to see if the Easterling Marauders can have that kind of impact that they will need, that the Easterlings will need them to have, because if they are just grinding up against the front line of Finarfin in particular, they will probably struggle quite a bit. The Despoilers of Dorcaranthia as well, they bring a bit of damage to the table. The initial charge might be good if they can get that in. If they are just adding themselves to a front line which is already in progress, then they won't be able to really lay down that charge bonus, which the Falksmen are. It's really the main feature of the Falksmen, really, in comparison to the other shock infantry. They've still got a decent amount of base damage, of course, but again, they will suffer if they're just thrown into a fight and are sort of ground down into oblivion. The Lothlin units will be able to stand up to that kind of punishment a lot more so. They may not have the same sort of accoutrements, really, as the Nargothrond spears that Finarfin roll with, like armor piercing and slightly better stats. But nonetheless, the Wardens of Lothlin are still a very solid unit to bring in this situation. There's more Despoilers up there on the hill, more Wardens down here. Quite a lot of spears, actually, which is quite interesting. Just in behind, we have the Marauders of Himring, which they're a little bit better all around in this sort of situation than the Easterling Marauders in front of them, because they can at least chip in a little bit more so in melee. Don't expect any miracles from them, though. They will still lose to higher quality Elven units fairly easily. They'll just put up more of a fight than the shirtless hooligans that are in front of them. Another unit of Marauders of Himring. One of the genuinely dangerous units that the Eastlings have, which can make an impact on a Finarfin frontline, will be the Sons of Ulfang. They have an absolutely monstrous charge, again. That will only really come into play if they can get a clean charge onto the front line and they're not having to wade through their own men to do it. And they are also not as durable, they're not as long-lasting as something like the Sons of Hurin, who really do eclipse the Sons of Ulfang, like I said in the last video. For me, not really on the same level as a bodyguard unit, to be honest with you, if that's their intent. There are far more of them, which is significant. But when you're talking about the kind of stats that the Sons of Hurin have over the Sons of Ulfang, again, to put your general in a unit that is as potentially fragile as this is questionable in a general game. But of course, in a scenario that's a little bit more, a little bit less the case. Well, actually, the Ravagers of Heimring, they're sort of the basic Falksmen, so again, the entry level, decent damage, but very, very fragile, especially if the Nargothrond archers get a hold of them. More of them back here. Nice to see the Warband of Lothlin as well. They're a very good entry-level unit in Silmarillion. They've got a nice shield value, and among the sort of basic units, that is significant. Because for a basic unit like this, all you really want them to do is hold the front line and stand and fight for as long as possible, and they will do that. They won't inflict an awful lot of damage, of course, but they will at least mean that you're not going to just completely collapse and disintegrate. Easterling Hunters, under normal circumstances, the Easterlings would not have this unit, but on this occasion they do have a unit of foot archers. Very, very basic, of course, so they will still get heavily out-skirmished by any defenders, but it's nice for the Easterlings to have this sort of tool in this situation, otherwise they do end up struggling quite a bit under normal circumstances. Now then, Wally Wolf, he's also got some Warband for Lothlin, so we'll be going through the rest of the Easterling armies relatively quickly, I think, because I doubt they have much else that is different. Maybe a couple of units of cavalry, but I doubt it given the situation that Thermopylae is. Ravagers of Heimring as well, several units of Falksmen. Excuse me. This always seems to be a bit of a theme these days, doesn't it? My voice seems to be constantly on the verge of completely giving up. Ravagers of Heimring, though, they're going to be here. But yeah, I mean, if the archers get a hold of them, they'll get wrecked, as I have learned in the past as well. More Wardens of Lothlin, more Easterons, more Sons of Ulfang. Wardens of Lothlin here, Warband of Lothlin. So more of the Lothlin units, it would seem. There's also the Chieftain's Honour Guard, which is where his general is, question mark? No, it's not actually, interestingly enough. But they are the tankiest unit of Easterling infantry that you can bring, of course. And they do actually perform that role better, I think, than the Sons of Ulfang perform the role of a shock infantry bodyguard as. But that might just be because of how tanky they actually are. Clan Guard of Lothlin as well, so we do actually have the Lothlin Swordsmen as well, which probably will be actually a little bit better in this sort of situation because they will last quite a long time, just like the spears. But they will also inflict a little bit more damage with their scimitars because they aren't subject to that spear malice. Several units of Clan Guard there, and also amongst the ruins are some Easterling Marauders. And then at the back edge of the map over here, in this very dense tree cover, we have Mevin, who's got some Halberdiers. The Halberdiers of Lothlin, actually, quite surprised to not see more of them in the main armies. They're going to be going right into the front line directly, because they can be such a useful tool. Honestly, pound for pound, I would say they're the best Easterling unit, just because of what they offer the Easterlings, which many of their other units cannot. They offer good armour-piercing damage, which is something many of the Falksmen actually don't do, as well as the ability to hold the front line very, very nicely. So I would highly recommend investing quite heavily in the Halberdiers of Lothlin if you're playing as the Easterlings, but that's just me, that might just be my playstyle. Easterling Marauders, Warband of Lothlin, there's more Wardens of Lothlin on the front line as well, more Heimring units, and further back I did see that some more Sons of Ulfang, so there are several units of Sons of Ulfang on the field today, which is a nice spike of damage that the Easterlings can use. Despoilers of Dorcaranthia, and then further back over here we do actually have some cavalry going up and around the flank. The Salamanders, the Salamandrine Guard, good for hunting down other cavalry. I have noticed that they're not maybe quite as good at hunting down monsters. You know, you can use them as an anti-elephant unit, but to be honest, you have to get into melee for that to be the case. And generally speaking, elephant class units will dish out an incredible amount of damage to standard cavalry class units. So while you can do that, don't expect it to be a hard counter. It really is highly situational. The Salamanders can take on elephant class units, but they can certainly take on other cavalry very nicely, both by skirmishing them down and kiting them, or by just getting straight up into melee with their bonuses. And we also have some Wardens of Lothlin, some Marauders of Heimring, and some Despoilers of Dorcaranthia, and that's pretty much it. There's also more Halberdiers back here, which will be very useful as the battle wears on, and of course more Sons of Ulfang. The Yoda Guy 12 is the one commanding that Easterling army as well. Now then, on to the defenders of Thermopylae here. General Artorius is going to be playing the House of Finarfin, and their goal is to hold a canyon choke point. So they are very much in their element. How embarrassing. But yes, they're very much in their element here, because this is really what Finarfin was built from the ground up to be able to do very, very effectively. And the defenders of Talathin are very basic, but they're still solid spears, which can be used as a nice bulwark. The bridge wards are in here, I think, as well. I can see longer spears, certainly. Yeah, there they are. They're going to be the centre point of this defence, and they will undoubtedly do a fantastic job at doing that. Swordsmen of Talathin in for the javelins as well, so this is a front line which is not entirely static. They will be able to do some damage. Not an awful lot of other Nargothrond units in here by the looks of things. Lots of defenders and swordsmen of Talath Dianin, but maybe not quite so much in the way of Wardens of Nargothrond, which that would offer a little bit of armour-piercing bite, which would have been nice, but the bridge wards are the most important thing here. Keeping them safe with all of these units around them is the main thing. There's also some stalkers in there as well with their throwing knives and their ability to hide. A little bit further back, he actually does have some Wardens of Nargothrond back here and the Sator Finderato, so the very, very nasty spear units that they have, and also some more stalkers of Tauren Faroth here. Up on the higher choke point, in and amongst the trees, we have an Ossiriand force commanded by Tundra's Fox, so he's going to have to deal with stuff like cavalry coming down his way. They're obviously certainly not really built for this kind of warfare in the same way that Finarfin are, but with stuff like the Mythern and Tol Galen, which they're another bodyguard unit, which, like I said, are a single HP, which, given the mix of single and double HP bodyguard units, I always think that puts the single HP bodyguards at a bit of a hefty disadvantage, to be honest with you, when you mix and match to the extent that Silmarillion does, and I'm yet to be convinced that it's a fantastic idea. Having said that, as standard higher end infantry, if that's how you look at the Mythern and Tol Galen, they're fantastic at that because of their armour piercing and their ability to hold the line, which when combined with the spear host of Rathloriel here is the closest Ossiriand get to having a really combative front line. And if you mix in as well the Gellian spears, you're going to be able to hold the line really reasonably well. Scouts of Gellian are in here as well, which are the archer version. They are currently hidden because they're under tree cover, exactly where Ossiriand are at their most comfortable. And just in behind we also have some Erfin and Tau, which is the bodyguard unit today. Again, they're single HP, but they are an archer unit, so it's easier to keep them out of harm's way. Armour piercing in melee as well, so if need be, they can throw that unit in. This is the problem with having trees this dense, though. Like, they disappear sometimes when you zoom in and zoom out. So I'd recommend against doing that in the future, to be honest with you, because it's a problem. But the final army, commanded by Lord of Balagost himself, is going to be Feanor, who, looking to be more of a reinforcement army. Certainly Ossiriand would benefit from Feanor's assistance. Finarfin might be okay on their own, but it's still going to be an uphill battle just because of the sheer amount of Easterlings they're facing down. Got some Rangers of Hellevorn, some Otorn Mighty Mo, which are a fantastic unit of bodyguard infantry. Again, multiple HP, all the things that you want to see. 54 men in the unit as well. Very, very nice, very highly armoured as well, as most high-end Feanor units are. Shield Bearers of Hellevorn, Stalkers of Thargelion, so it's interesting actually, mostly just basic human infantry and human javelins and human archers, and only one unit of high-tier Noldor Elves, which are the Otorn Mighty Mo, so it'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But without further ado, let's begin. And undoubtedly it will be Finarfin that get their ranks tested first and foremost. Eclipse 2500 is going to be the first one in, and that means that he is going to have to throw himself against a real meat grinder, to be honest with you. Like, if you're playing as Eclipse's army in this situation, you just have to sort of accept the fact, really, that you are going to be facing off against a faction which is most at home in this kind of situation, where they're having to just sort of accept the pressure that is coming their way. Having said that, though, it's not quite as scary as it could be. I mean, they still have the Bridge Wars, they still have Wardens of Nargothrond, but not a huge amount of archers, in fact, none by the looks of things. So you could use stuff like Easterling Hunters at your leisure, really, but again, the amount of damage they do is very, very limited. So as long as the shielded units are covering the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, that isn't really going to be too much of an issue moving forwards. Stalkers, however, are back there, Wardens of Nargothrond at the gates, the Elven statues in place. I don't know what location in Beleriand this would most closely resemble, but I'm sure that I can find something on the map that would be appropriate for the situation to use in the title. But yeah, Defenders and Swordsmen of Talath, decent units, but to be fair, I mean, as long as they have good opportunities to maybe charge in with their Falksmen to do a bit of damage to them right off the bat, they could be in a good place here. We shall have to wait and see. I do back the Easterlings on this occasion because their numbers advantage, unlike last time where it was a little bit more even and the Easterlings ended up losing because they just didn't have the staying power to keep that assault of theirs going. On this occasion, though, because they have a significant numbers advantage, even if they are attacking into some factions which are really, really good at accepting that pressure, I do still think ultimately they should have the manpower to get the job done on this occasion. Because it's not as if they're entirely glass cannons. Again, the Lothland Corps should allow them to take the beating that allows them to outlast the damage that the Elves can give out, and then the Falksmen can do some damage. They've got a bit of archer support. Their axe throwers could be incredibly useful as well. But we shall see, shall we not? Interesting over here though, you can see there is actually a position over here where they could potentially use some archer cover. This canyon path as Ossiriand start to move forward. Hunters of Rathloriel are javelins actually, which are coming over here, so Ossiriand going to be lending a bit of a hand, which is good, because they do have archers, which is going to be necessary, I think, to blunt that Easterling attack from the front. This encampment over here, though, is where Ossiriand are presumably going to make their stand. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because there are numerous ways that the Easterlings could actually approach this particular situation. But the calm before the storm, the deep breath before the plunge, as the Easterlings stare down their foe. And it is a scary one. Honestly though, the bridge walls of Nargothrond are the only thing to be truly scared of, because the swordsmen and spears of Talafdin and defenders of Talafdin are decent, but you can easily overwhelm them over time, as the Easterlings. The bridge walls, however, are a bit of a different matter. If you just fight them from the front, then fairly indefinitely they're going to be able to just sort of hold on to their advantages. Interesting to see how, on the front foot here, the House of Finarfin are prepared to be. They're getting very, very close to the Easterling line, and they do have to be a little bit careful, because if they're the ones that get into range first, this allows the Easterlings to use their axe throwers with nary any obstacles. Having said that, if they do move forward before the Easterlings are ready, before Wollywolf gets into position to truly back Eclipse up, he could find himself struggling really very, very quickly, which perhaps is the idea. Swordsman of Talafdin will be able to do a bit of damage as well. Meanwhile, you can see here the Salamanders are going to be marauding forwards, and the Flaming Arrows. So actually it's over here where the first trading is going to be happening. Skirmishes of Rathloriel. I don't think actually taking any losses there. Salamanders just letting the Green Elves know of their presence. The Green Elves don't do too well in an outright skirmish. I don't know why they're shaken, to be honest with you. Maybe they're getting a bit of friendly fire and hitting themselves. That's the only... yeah, that's got to be it. But yeah, the Green Elves having to surrender the high ground, and now they're going to have to leave, because this is not where they do best. They're much similar to the Woodland Realm over in Reforge, where they get their best work done through sheer damage. If they're the ones taking hits like this, it's not a good start here from Tundra's Fox. He went forward a bit either too slowly or too quickly. Really, he was caught right in the middle there, and unfortunately he's now getting shot down by the Easterling cavalry, and I think Ossiriand are just going to have to abandon this encampment, to be honest with you, because already it's proven to be a liability for them. Over here, however, it's going to be much more of a blood and thunder kind of engagement here as Eclipse moves forward, taking a little bit of damage from the standard javelins of Finarfin, but now Finarfin are going to move forward, going to get into the engagement. Defenders of Talafdin engaging first, javelins raining down as well. I think actually, yes indeed, Scouts of Gellion up on the high ground, going to be using their missiles as well. Oof. That frame drop though. Despoilers of Dor Caranthia will be a good target for any javelins and arrows that are perceived, because they will be really very, very weak to that sort of thing, and they are capable of dishing out a fair amount of damage as well. Axe throwers doing their thing, trying to throw and do some damage. I mean, they would definitely want to be going after stuff like the bridge wards, I think, but they're already too close to their own men for that to even be possible. But yes, Talafdin and units getting into the front line, and already the Easterlings engaging. It's not so much of a problem if they lose the first engagement though. As long as they keep this attack going, eventually you would imagine even someone like Finarfin, who are most at home in this kind of fight where they're just sort of slowly grinding the enemy down, they should be fine. Easterling hunters in behind here shooting some of their arrows into the backfield, going after some pretty fragile stalkers. They're going to need to do something about that, I think, Finarfin. They're going to need to move them or utilise them sooner than perhaps they would have liked. Marauders of Himring trying to use their throwing axes, but they are going to be engaged by a unit of Swordsmen of Talafdin, and among the hybrid unit world, the Swordsmen of Talafdin are certainly further up the food chain than the Marauders of Himring, so they are going to lose this fight, unfortunately for them. Here come the Stalkers, and more swordsmen as well. They haven't committed their spears to the front line yet, which is quite interesting. It'll be interesting to see how this develops as well. Spear host of Rathloriel, you can still see here the Salamanders. They took a couple of volleys by the looks of things, taking a little bit of damage, but certainly they'll be quite happy with the fact that Elven corpses litter this encampment already. Some of the tents also set aflame by the flaming arrows, and you can see they are going to approach from both directions. I like this. One Easterling army coming through this very narrow gorge, the other one going to be using the main pathway. It'll be interesting to see how Ossiriand and their Feanor reinforcements deal with things here. Finarfin, however, doing a good job on the front line, so Eclipse doing his job really as the initial cannon fodder, just softening Finarfin up, presumably for Wollywolf to come in and try and wipe away what resistance remains after this meat grinder of an engagement. There's Despoilers of Dorcaranthia and Ravagers of Himring in here. Arrows flying back and forth from both sides, but as you would expect, the defenders have got a slightly better position. And the Scouts of Galleon, basic Ossiriand archers, yes, but Ossiriand archery and damage with their archers is their whole thing, their biggest strength. So even their basic archers here are going to be able to do a good amount of damage, especially as it pertains to Easterling Falksmen. You can see already in some places the Easterling front line is looking a little bit thin on the ground. The Lothland units are doing their best, but they're still getting turned back the other way. There's some Sons of Ulfang in here. Not actually taking any missile damage, so they may have gone unnoticed, which would be a good thing for the Eastlings, because they will do a good amount of damage, especially to basic Finarfin units. Meanwhile, you know things are getting a little bit hairy when Eastron Marauders are having to be committed to plug a gap in the line. They're definitely going to need another wave coming forward. The Easterlings at some point relatively soon. Eastron Hunters firing in. Ravagers of Himring actually doing, or Himring I should say, doing a pretty good job. So backing up the Marauders. The Marauders are coming back now with their one-handed Falxes. And maybe going to be enough to overload a single unit of Swordsmen of Talathin, and they'll need more support over on this flank, but it looks as though Artorius recognises that fact, and he's going to bring another unit of Swordsmen in. That should be enough to stop the fragile Himring units in their tracks. Eastron Hunters. So yeah, pretty much the entirety of Eclipse's force was committed forward really very, very quickly, which is what you'd expect in this situation. He just needs to slam into Finarfin and do as much damage as he possibly can, and when they're good and softened up, Wollywolf will come in with his army and presumably wipe them away. Interesting to see Ossiriand move forward quite quickly when the Easterlings were moving to take the encampment. I quite like that. When the infantry was there, they saw the opportunity to engage in melee. Having said that, Spear Host of Rathloriel are going to need some support if they're going up against Lothland units, because the tankiness of the Lothland units should be enough to outlast even the skill of some of these Green Elven elements. Mythern and Tol Galen moving forward, but it's not a particularly great shape to this engagement for the Green Elves. As the Yoda guy moves forward with more Lothland units, they will take a lot of damage really at the hands of the Mythern, but the Salamanders, it's risky to go through here like this, but they will be able to avoid the wrath of the Spear Host of Gellion. And if they get in behind enemy lines, they could cause a bit of havoc. They need to be very careful. This could end up being a waste, but it could also end up being exactly the kind of distraction which allows them to seize the advantage on the front line. And I have to say, this isn't really where the Green Elves do their best work in this kind of engagement. So any advantage the Eastlings can seize will be very, very good. Having said that, the Salamanders have found themselves caught by Hunters of Rathloriel, who are spears in melee. They are the Javelin hybrids, I believe. Yeah, this isn't going to be good for the Salamanders. They've bitten off a little bit more than they can chew here. And they will also be sandwiched from the other side as well by some Shield Bearers of Hellebore, so that's going to be the end for those Salamanders, and they didn't really get any sort of advantage from doing that. But the attempt was there, which is nice. Meanwhile, over here, if this is an entire army from Mevon, then he should have what it takes to slowly wear them down. But with a unit of Mythern being committed to the front line, that's exactly the kind of support that the Spear Host of Rathloriel needed. So for the time being, also those Eastron Marauders getting put in a bin by Ossiriand's archers, as you would well expect. Still some ammunition. Huntsman of Thargelion over here as well, so definitely some good arch support coming in here. However, in behind enemy lines now, some Marauders of Himring. That's the last thing Finarfin would want to see. The first army has been able to find a gap and get in behind enemy lines. Now, they do have, I believe, some sort of response that they can give, although I'm not actually sure. They're going to be able to get into the rear lines here. This will be cleaned up, I think, but it's the kind of distraction that the Finarfin front line can scarcely afford. If this was a unit like the Sons of Ulfang, this might be enough to sort of start to trigger the downfall of the entirety of the Finarfin line, but I really like that from Eclipse. He was able to worm a unit in behind enemy lines, and even if he will ultimately fall, he's going to be able to do some good damage on the front line. And this should mean that, I mean, Wollywolf should be living on easy street when it comes to clearing up this Finarfin front line at this point. Very, very well done there. Defenders of Talathin in fighting. I mean, this flank is looking like it's going to collapse. Wollywolf has got some of his units on the line now. They may just be Eastron Marauders, but still. Ravagers of Himring. So now with the second army starting to appear in ever greater numbers on the front line, it's perhaps no surprise that Finarfin are starting to look as though they're struggling a little bit. Stalkers of Tauren far off on the front line. They'll do pretty well against the Warband of Lothland individually, but of course they're starting to get outgunned on the front. Well, outnumbered I should say, not outgunned. But Swordsmen of Talathin and still fighting with the Himring units, and they're taking some hits in the side, both from Eastron Hunters and from Eastron Marauders. As far as archers and axe throwers go, both of them very, very basic, but all they need to do is a little bit of damage to facilitate their infantry to do most of the heavy lifting. That was always going to be how the Easterlings would win this fight, by leveraging their numbers on the front line and just smashing the defences to splinters. And even Finarfin will struggle if you can do that properly. The Green Elves, meanwhile, I mean, this is a very narrow path, so they're going to be able to do quite well here. Spear Host of Gellion moving forward, so no rest for the weary as it pertains to Mevon's army. But all he needs to do is keep moving in, and slowly but surely the battle will presumably be won elsewhere. Although over here, Shield Bearers of Helavorn getting onto the front line, but the Eastlings also going to move forward with some Marauders of Himring. There's not a lot of Mythern and Tol Galen left, only 15, and there's not exactly a huge pile of bodies around them. They were committed to a fight where they were not really in the best shape. And the Easterlings have managed to make that work for them quite a lot, so certainly the Easterlings have the momentum with them. Rathloriel units here in reserve, another unit of Clan Guard. You can see the Eastlings, or the Green Elves, starting to sort of try and work up the line of these warband. The Yodagai sees that and commits another unit of infantry to prevent them from doing that. And the Wardens of Lothland, like I said, should be able to defeat, well, they'll definitely be able to defeat Hunters of Rathloriel, the hybrid unit that they are. But yeah, tanky enough to take some punishment. Clan Guard of Lothland moving forward. There's still enough reinforcements back here from the Yodagai. He's still got another unit of Salamanders as well, should he try to worm his way through once again. But so far, so good. The Eastlings don't need to rush things over here. They don't need to rush in general, to be fair, because I think the momentum in this fight overall is with them. Over here, this engagement is going in favour of the Green Elves slowly, but Mevon still has a lot more left to give, certainly. Meanwhile, Eastron Marauders forcing their way through, and yeah, this front line at this point has fallen apart. There's still a few Finarfin elves over here, but Sons of Ulfang are in here. They're actually still alive, which is impressive. They've been on the front line for a while. They weren't getting targeted by missiles, however, which was a bit of a mistake in hindsight, because they would have been able to lay down some really good AP damage, and when it comes to basic Talathdinian units, they're not going to be able to withstand that all that well. But the Easterlings, victorious. To be fair, I mean, it's not entirely without cost. A lot of their army was dealt some pretty serious blows by that. The problem they have now, though, of course, is the Eastlings could send them up this little side passageway here, and all of a sudden the encampment in the mountains could be facing an enemy on the three sides, although I would assume they're probably going to go right down the canyon and hit the second Finarfin front line, made up of Wardens of Nargothrond. As scary as they are, I don't think they have the numbers to be able to withstand the Easterlings as they continue to try and push forward with their momentum. Huntsmen of Thargelion trying to hold on the front line with their spears. Again though, the Easterlings using their numbers. Huntsmen of Thargelion firing their missiles in, and they can pretty much take their pick, to be honest with you, of the Easterling forces that are moving forward. Wouldn't be hitting the Clan Guard of Lothland from the front if I were them. Probably the most durable target outside of the Chieftain's Honour Guard. If you can, you want to be going for... I mean, they're hitting them. I mean, they're not going to do a huge amount of damage, though. Is there any... I'd actually just save the ammunition. You can go after the Ravagers of Himring, maybe? Eastron Marauders in position. Yeah, surely these Thargelion Huntsmen are not going to last too much longer, and indeed they do rout under the weight of force from the Easterlings. Scouts of Gellion, who are actually armour-piercing, I think, in melee, but their attack values are relatively low. They have something special about them in melee, and I do believe it's AP, but their attack values, like I said, relatively low anyway, so don't be thinking that they're going to just like take the Lothland units and put them in a dumpster, because they won't. But it's nice to know they do have a bit of bite in case they just get any old garbage sent after them to try and shut them down. The Eastlings are sending up a little expeditionary force over here, though, but I would imagine most of their strength down here will probably be held back for trying to go through the main canyon. Speaking of which, javelins being utilised, Stalkers of Thargelion. They do have a good angle, I think. A decent angle. They will be able to do a pretty decent amount of damage. I mean, I think the Stalkers of Thargelion are non-AP projectiles, so they'll do more damage to the Himring units than the more heavily armoured Lothlin units, and of course the Eastlings giving as good as they get with their axe throwers. Once again, neither side's projectiles in this situation are AP, like I said. But this is good for the Eastlings. I mean, AP is not necessarily what you need against a spear host of Gellion anyway. In fact, it's certainly not what you need. Axe throwers will do a wondrous job against them. It's really just a case of how much ammunition the shield bearers of Helleborn absorb. Skirmish of Rathloriel defeat seems certain. It seems like a slow but sure defeat over here in the encampment so far. Over on this side, meanwhile, Otorn Mighty Mo being committed over here, so perhaps what they're thinking is, you know, there's blood in the water over here, we're winning this fight. If we can win over here, if we can win one of the two engagements, then we can turn it into a winner-takes-all kind of thing with what's left from both sides. But I'm not sure if that's the way to go, because if I were Mevin, I'd be quite happy about this. If I were having to be the sacrificial lamb, I'd be fine with it. The Otorn Mighty Mo and the Mythern Tolgalem will of course easily defeat the Easterlings. The damage from the Despoilers of Dor-Caranthia will not be enough. I don't know. This is the real threat at this point, and I'm not sure. Does Mevin have units back down there? No, this is entirely the Yoda guy's army. So, but he still has a lot left to give over here, and basic units are not going to cut it for very long. They could end up getting surrounded before they kill Mevin's army off in that canyon. They do have reinforcements though, so they can hold on to this choke point for a little bit longer, but it will be a losing proposition for a little while longer yet, I think. Meanwhile, Easterling Marauders taking a bit of damage. Marauders firing only 2 of them. There really is nothing they have over here in terms of missiles though, so anything the Eastlings want to do in terms of throwing axes or any sort of projectiles, the Sartor Finderato and the Wardens of Nargothrond will just have to sit there and take it, which, to be fair, against basic axe throwers, the Nargothrond units and the Sartor Finderato are very heavily armoured and shielded. They won't take a huge amount of damage, but every little helps in this situation. You're going to need every elf really fighting the good fight in melee. It's also very possible that the Eastlings used up all their ammunition to break up that front line as efficiently as possible, because they are charging into melee, which it would suggest that. Of course, Easterling Marauders, Warband of Lothlin, they're not going to do much of anything really against what is going to be an analogous to the 300, I would assume. This unit of Sartor and the 2 units of Nargothrond Wardens. There they are going to fight. And they will fight to the bitter end, I would assume, but with stuff like more Lothlin units that are healthy and Chieftain's Honour Guard, eventually I would assume they are going to fold, but we shall see. This force meanwhile heading up into the hills. Still, one by one, it's only basic units of out-of-ammo skirmishers that they're having to deal with. I don't know whether this is going to be a particularly decisive engagement in the grand scheme of things, but it means the defenders have got more plates that they need to keep spinning. As the Wardens of Lothlin. And the Lothlin units here, this is part of the reason why I do really like them as the solid core of the Eastlings. It's definitely my favourite part of them as a whole. Probably the most boring part of them as a whole as well, to be fair. Just the heavily armoured core, including halberdiers, but I guess I'm just a boring kind of guy in that respect. Wardens are there, more Marauders of Heimring. I mean, to be fair, there were halberdiers over here, but they have been counteracted really by the Gellion spear hosts. This is a little bit interesting though. They need to get these Gellion spear hosts on the front line again, otherwise those halberdiers will actually be fairly efficient against the Otorn. And they are going to do so now. The Green Elves cuddling up to get into a closer engagement once again. Kind of. I mean, they are still winning over here, the defenders, but will it be enough? I'm not so sure. Another unit of Despoilers of Dor-Caranthia moving forward. They're actually holding on reasonably well. Rangers of Helleborn arriving on the front line. The Eastlings need more. They do have more, but they're quite a long way away. They need to get them a little bit closer for my liking. Meanwhile, yeah, all of these, the remnants of that Finarfin front line that have routed and are now leaving the field. What's going on here? A routing Warband of Lothlin who did actually make it through the Spartan lines, interestingly enough, but you can see here the solid spear line is continuing to hold. Lothlin units arriving on the scene. Clan Guard of Lothlin, the Honour Guard as well. Again, eventually I feel as though they will probably fall. If they don't, I suppose it's a bit of a damning indictment on the overall level of Easterling survivability. Ravagers of Heimring. Plenty of Lothlin units. They have a bit of damage as well in those Falxers. What have we got here? Ravagers of Heimring moving up here. So another unit of Falxmen being committed so that they can try and push their way through here, because they were actually He actually came up against a bit of a roadblock in the Stalks of Thargallion, a little bit stronger in melee than the Huntsmen, pulling out those one-handed axes, and certainly not disgracing themselves in the melee fight. So, fair play to them. Meanwhile, Marauders, again, it's, you know, Clan Guard of Lothland winning, so too are the Hunts of Rathlorel. I think the addition of another unit of Despoilers should be enough to require more reinforcements over on this part of the line on Ossiriand's part. We shall have to wait and see on that one. Salamandrine Guard. Yeah, they have enough reinforcements over here. I think they need to get them a little closer. But Finarfin Tower as well. I mean, that AP spike could be fairly substantial. More javelins coming forth from the Stalkers. What are they actually firing at? The Otorn. How much damage have they actually taken? A few more losses, to be fair. Ravagers of Heimring, or Himring. Getting onto the front line, trying to do a little bit more damage to this very, very solid Elven front line. Remarkable indeed. Meanwhile, back with the 300, they are continuing to fight well, and to be fair again, Wards of Nargothrond, AP spears are not going to be as damaging as like a unit of AP heavy axemen, but the AP that they have does mean that it, against heavily armoured units, it is enough to, at the very least, overturn their spear malice. I would say slightly more than overturn their spear malice, to be honest, because the spearman animation is actually better than the standard infantry animation. So I would suggest that the AP, like we've seen it as well in Reforged with stuff like the Citadel Guard and the Numenorian heavy spear as well in that regard, they're fantastic at this sort of thing, because the AP makes all the difference, and especially against stuff like Honour Guard, Lothland units, it's when they are at their most efficient. And the Sartor Finderato, they're not AP, I don't think, but of course what they lack in AP they make up for in terms of base stats and the fact that they're multiple HP, so they're even harder to kill. Another unit of Clan Guard moving forward. Again, I do believe eventually the Easterlings, because there becomes a tipping point really where the Elves will lose enough to the point where the Easterlings can just roll through them. But they will almost certainly rack up a decent kill count, especially considering the Lothland units are no pushovers. They will do a good job. Meanwhile, Rangers of Helleborn, one unit at a time, this little Easterling infantry column is pushing up the hill. Rangers of Helleborn, however, will be able to give as good as they get in melee. I don't know if the Himring units, together with some of those Easterling Hunts, are going to be enough to push them out of the way. I mean, they're certainly not Noldor infantry levels, but Stalks of Thargallion moving forward, so again, Edain auxiliaries of the House of Feanor doing their thing. Meanwhile, over here, it's looking pretty grim. This is one of the areas where I think the Easterlings will finally start to... They've had the upper hand throughout most of this fight, albeit in a slender fashion. With the victory here, though, I think they'll start to seize control in a more substantial manner. Halberdiers moving forward as well. That's the last thing you want to see when you're already low on reinforcements. I think that was Eclipse's general that was pushing up the hill there, that was killed at the hands of those Edain auxiliaries. Hunts of Rathlorel are in reserve. Few units returning from routing. They'll be recommitted, I assume, but I don't know. With fresh halberdiers on the approach, there's another unit of despoilers that could be used. Good target though. Nice volley from the javelins there, doing a lot of damage actually, killing off many of those Lothland halberdiers. If they can keep doing that, then maybe not all is lost. The Earthen Tower are still on the front line. The damage they can kick out is very impressive. And over here, still, Mevin is floundering in the face of the sheer brutality that is the Otorn Mighty Man. Again, in terms of their crafts, their gear, their armour, they truly have no equal in terms of infantry in the game. They're doing a fantastic job, with the support of the Mythern offering a bit of armour piercing, and the Spear Host of Gellion offering the closest thing to solid phalanx that Ossiriand can muster. It's been a winning combination so far on this front line. And the halberdiers have not been enough. Marauders of Himring moving forward. They still have enough... well, I don't know about that. There's still Sons of Ulfang, but if it's just the Sons of Ulfang, they'll just be overwhelmed, especially if some skirmishes of Rathlorel decide to join the fray. Meanwhile, yeah, this is how I was thinking this fight was going to end, and this is how it's going to be. In most engagements like this, even if your units are very, very solid, ultimately, players who have played a lot of the game will know that you can just force path your units through, use your mass, and break the lines, and as soon as you're attacking from the rear with units like this, you're in massive trouble. So they've held on to this front line admirably, but of course, when you're dealing with just 3 units that are without reinforcements, this was always going to be the way that this fight ended for Finarfin and the Easterlings. That is a fairly decisive blow from which the elves on this occasion are not going to be able to recover, unfortunately for them. Sons of Ulfang moving forward, that would really be the nail in the coffin if they can get in and amongst things and start swinging those serrated AP Felxes around. Of course, serration will probably do the opposite of helping with piercing armour, but still. Wardens of Lothlin also moving into the flank, trying to work up the lines of the Wardens of Nargothrond. Kill off as many as they can, but at this stage, the battle has gone in a direction from which it will not be returning from. Over here, meanwhile, Ossiriand have actually fought the Easterlings mostly to a standstill, which is fairly impressive. There's still Sons of Ulfang and Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir to be committed, however. Will that be enough to finally break the spirit of the Elves of Ossiriand as they continue to hold on? Commit the Sons of Ulfang over here, the Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir, try and get them up as they continue to work up the line here into the side of the Spear Host of Rathloriel. Yeah, it's not really... I mean, you know, Kinsmen of Denethor, the legendary company. You can bring 2 of them, of course, because they're a half-strength unit, but yeah, they're not going to be enough to save the day, I don't think, on this occasion. Still, the Otorn Mighty Mo. 23 of them remain as they continue to slowly cut their way through the Easterling menace. But even they are not going to be enough to see the battle go the other way. More Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir. Salamandrian Guard just being thrown onto the front, and I think the Easterlings sense their victory is upon them, so they're just going to move everything forward and try and finish this in as timely a manner as possible. Another unit of Spear Host of Galleon being added to the front line. That will shore things up on a temporary basis at the very least. Yeah, here you can see. I mean, it was very much a an exhibition in what exactly to do with a defensive position, put on here by the Easterlings down here on the lower ground. Eclipse, the initial front line, he got some units in behind, even though he was outgunned in terms of quality. He used positioning to his advantage, outflanked the defenders, got into the back, and from there the Finarfin line started to fall apart very, very quickly, where it was actually holding on reasonably well. It got away from them. Then over here, they engaged initially. They couldn't skirmish them down first, so they used another method. They engaged initially, wore them down a little bit, and then as soon as they hit that critical tipping point, they pushed through with their mass and numbers, and then their quality counted for very little in the end, which is how it's going to be. On this occasion, I don't think the Persians are going to lose taste for combat. A bit slow here from the Yoda guy, to be honest with you. He needs more units on the front line. The Despoilers of Dor-Caranthir need to be committed. Skirmishers are going to try and fire right up the line, which is fair enough. Sons of Ulfang getting onto the front line. This should hasten the demise of the Rathloriel units that have been barring the way from the Lothlin spears. Over here, meanwhile, the last roll of the dice for Mevin as the Sons of Ulfang get committed in. To be fair, though, the Kinsmen of Denethor were committed over here as well, but with a charge, I don't know, the Sons of Ulfang should be more than enough to kill the Kinsmen. There goes the Finarfin general in the Sartor Findarata, killed off, and even over here I think the numbers may be getting away from them, with the Marauders of Himring also moving forward, committing forward just everything he has at this point. There's not a lot of the Otorn left, only 14. Not a lot of the Phalanx either. The Kinsmen of Denethor are a strong unit to commit, but with the Sons of Ulfang over here, I'm not sure whether that's going to be sufficient. Still a couple of halberds as well, which is quite interesting. And over here, the last of the Sartor. They will... Actually, no, Wards of Nargothrond are still in here. Chieftains Honour Guard, however, with their huge round shields and flags double flags decorating their backs. And again, they're very much like the Clan Guard of Lothlin, only on steroids, really. There's still a lone elf here in and amongst all of these him-ring. As you know, they're fighting back to back. On this occasion, the Easterlings / the Persians will have victory to avenge their defeat in Greater Gellion before it's going to be the end of Finarfin. And so the final battle. Interesting map, this. Despoilers of Dorcaranthia pushing through the lines. The Spear Host of Gellion trying to get into position, but it's a little bit late for that, with the Despoilers now interspersed all throughout this area. They'll probably take a few losses here, the Easterling Falksmen, but they've already completely ruined the structure of the front line. There also goes the general for the Elves of Ossiriand. They are now shaken. Many of their units are starting to rout. Despoilers moving forward. Marauders of Himring. Mevin has decided to crash through the lines. Not an awful lot yet. He's just pushed his way through. Kinsmen of Denethor, only 10 of them remaining. The arrival of the Sons of Orfang actually proving to be a tipping point there, but it was already when the lines were horribly weakened. And this is going to be it, the Easterlings with a good win. Nice scenario this as well. The Easterlings started off with, in the last one I felt as though they started off with a bit of a disadvantage really, and it showed. They ended up losing. On this occasion though, they started off with the advantages in the traditional ways that the attackers tend to have them, and they were able to make them work in their favour very nicely. And they were definitely good value for the victory. There is also another one of these also coming up, like I said. We'll go through that in the results screen. Sons of Orfang pushing forward, the end of the Spear Host of Gellion. Is there still fighting going on down here? There is, so I mean, they may very well outlast the Green Elves in the hills in typical Finarfin fashion. Yeah, they will. So Feanor might have one or two things left on the hillside, but Finarfin able to last longer than Ossiriand. So you can see when things started to fall apart for Ossiriand, they really did fall apart very quickly, whereas Finarfin, they've been fighting a losing battle this whole time. And yet they've still managed to last a little bit longer. There goes the Feanor General at the hands of the Sons of Orfang. And even Feanor does not last as long as this one Warden of Nargothrond, as he takes continued blows from the Falksmen and the Spearmen that are all around him. And yeah, the Easterlings. I do like the look of the Lothlin units as well. Like the J-Monster has said that like the Rajput influences on them, and I do really like that. There goes the Warden of Nargothrond, and victory.
Such a cruel twist of fate that snatched victory from our grasp.
Well, I don't think so. I think the Easterlings were always in the ascendancy there. Only 565 kills. I would assume that's Mevin, because he probably had the hardest task. He was going up against very elite units backed up by a phalanx, and he was in a very narrow gap. Captain Bolg for Ossiriand, that's an interesting name. As for the rest, differences, I would say, but not really all that important. The Easterling players, each one did their job, and each one did it well. I do think here on the lower ground against Finarfin, though, that was where the that was probably more impressive. Like all the Eastlings needed to do in the hills really was engage, and the shape of the engagement was such that they were always going to slowly but surely win through. Whereas the shape of the engagement had to be moulded a little bit more by the Eastlings on the low ground, and they did that well. The defenders was an uphill struggle for them. It was always going to be very, very tough to win, if not impossible. Considering the fact that the third army they had, the Feanor one, was a very limited strength one, so it was effectively 2.5 versus 4, which is not an impossible situation, but it was always going to be very, very hard. But nonetheless, a victory for the Easterlings and, by association, the Persians. So yeah, big thank you to Lord of Belagos for sending this one to me. Let's see what got the kills for him. Otorn, my team are getting 296. 296 is actually maybe a little bit less than I was expecting they would have. But still, very impressive. 220 on some Huntsmen as well, presumably firing down into the low ground here. Huntsmen of Thargellion also doing a decent job there as well. Good spread of kills that, but a lot of them were projectile units, the shield bearers that weren't, relatively average in terms of their performance, but the rest did quite well. In fact, anything that wasn't a shield bearer of Halavorn got over 100 kills, so you can't really argue too much with that. But yeah, big thank you to Lord of Belagos for sending this one to me. Any that you wish to send me in the future, do feel free. I know that I've got another one that I need to do, because presumably any further ones will be on the new build, which I do need to catch up with as soon as I've recorded these 3 Silmarillion replays that I've got on the backlog. This one will be coming out, I think, probably the day after Christmas. I think Boxing Day is when this one will probably be released. So we'll see. I might have had like a little Christmas message as well on Christmas Day itself, but again, that's something that we'll deal with a little bit closer to the time, because again, the scheduling, I'm trying to get back into the swing of things with recording and streaming now that the vast bulk of the laboratory work in university has been completed, and I can mould my schedule a little bit more at home now that I don't need to be on campus as regularly. But yeah, so next up will probably be, in terms of a replay, will probably be Eclipse's scenario, and then following on from that will probably be a Reforged battle of some description. You know, I've got quite a few Reforged replays at this point actually that I can be getting on with, a few of them on maps that we scarcely see as well, like Longbottom, so might be that one. And then to ring in the new year, it might either be like the Longbottom Siege, or it might be the other one that Belagos has given me of this, which is the battle, which is the first one of 2021. We shall have to wait and see, but I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.